BBOR Black Box Online Radio, coming to you from West Virginia. BlackBoxNed88 on Instagram for the bonus podcast. And just a quick reminder, every Monday is Zodiac Mondays. Wednesday is an Ask Me Anything. That's an AMA, so please drop your questions below for things that you would like discussed here on the show. And Friday is an Anything Goes. Any subject is fair game, mostly talking about true crime, serial killers, the Zodiac Killer, but any subject is welcome. All right, so please share some ideas in the comment section about what you would like to hear about on this channel, and let's get started. Okay, hello everybody. Today is Thursday, and on Thursdays I've been doing a segment called the Versus series, where I talk about two major incidents from the true crime world and do a comparing and contrasting to create a psychological breakdown. And this is the first episode that I've done talking about the Preppy killer and the Affluenza teen that is not about serial killers. And the reason why I wanted to do this one is because both of these stories involve people who were trying to put on the facade of having a very glorified lifestyle, and in one case, the person actually was living somewhat of a larger-than-life means of obtaining illegal activities. So I thought that this would be a very interesting choice for the Versus series. On Tuesdays, I do a segment on this channel called True Crime Talk Radio, where I respond to just various pieces of the media in the true crime world. And I first learned about Robert Chambers, the Preppy killer, because of an episode that was done about him on Court TV. I was just watching it in the morning one day, and they were talking about the story of a man who committed the murder of Jennifer Levin back in 1986. And to provide an introduction here, Chambers was dubbed the Preppy killer and the Central Park Strangler by the media after the August 26, 1986 strangulation death of 18-year-old Jennifer Levin in New York Central Park, for which he was originally charged with second-degree murder. And the Affluenza teen was Ethan Couch, a teenager who drove his truck 70 miles an hour through a residential neighborhood, killing 4 people and injuring numerous other individuals. He was known as the Affluenza teen for some reasons that we will get into later on. But with the Preppy killer, I did that segment on True Crime Talk Radio, and Apex Prowler responded in the comments section by saying that he wanted to correct me on something, that Robert Chambers was not an affluent, rich kid. He was instead someone who was putting on the facade of being an affluent, rich kid. In fact, his parents were somewhat connected to the higher society of New York, but in all reality they worked in somewhat of a modest way. His mother was a nurse who had connections to various influential people, and he was writing off a lot of those connections, and he also got into very prestigious schools and actually had friends from more affluent circles because of those connections, but he got into the schools on scholarships. And he was a very clear example of someone who was just trying to maintain the image of being richer than he actually was. And one way that he would keep up with that lifestyle is burglaries. He was stealing from people, even from the people whom he claimed to be his friends. And I would definitely like to cite the YouTube channel True Crime Recaps for providing a lot of the connecting factors in the case of Robert Chambers. But yes, he's doing these illegal activities to fund this lifestyle, and he's interacting with a lot of people, he's dating a lot of women, and this is how the story of Jennifer Levin takes place, that he's at a bar or a restaurant one night, and that he ends up with her some way, somehow, that they leave together, and they go into Central Park. And his defense was that she wanted to have sexual intercourse with him. She wanted some type of relationship with him, and he refused her. And she was again trying to constantly force her way onto him. But he fought back, and he punched her in the throat. I did not hear that exact detail on True Crime Recaps, but on Court TV, they were very clear about something. They said he punched her in the throat, and then that led to her death, it was a complete accident or it was self-defense in some way. He was just trying to refuse her. And then there are some other details, though, that were not mentioned in the early news coverage that came out on True Crime Recaps, and that was that the purse that belonged to Jennifer Levin was torn apart, and that the items were scattered around. By torn apart, I don't mean the material was actually damaged, but the items from her purse were somewhat scattered near the body, and that her earrings had been removed. And another point that Court TV left out was that Robert Chambers was actually seen sitting on a wall nearby, just looking at the body for an extended period of time after the crime had taken place. Now, I always thought that this was an absolutely perplexing defense, that he punched her in the throat, because she didn't die from that type of injury. She was asphyxiated, and all the sources are very clear about that she passed away because of asphyxiation, and they believe that her jacket was actually taken over her face, pulled over her face, and then tied around her throat so that her whole face would have been covered by the jacket, and that she was asphyxiated, she was strangled. And even on the Wikipedia page, I think it's really quite odd that it says Chambers was dubbed the Preppy Killer because of the strangulation death of Jennifer Levin. And I mean, why not just call it a murder? I mean, because he almost certainly murdered her, and it's even more than that. He was originally charged with second-degree murder. So, I mean, I know lawyers can often play things around and get people to reduce the sentences to a lower charge. Sometimes people plead to manslaughter, and the legal language is very technical, but I just thought that was a very weird way of phrasing it. But all the sources seem to agree that there's no possible way she could have died from either being punched in the throat, or the way the True Crime Recaps described it, that she was just sort of thrown over, and I don't know how she would have been asphyxiated by him throwing her off of him. Very, very bizarre stuff. But there's a website out there called townandcountrymag.com. I used them in the past when I was reading up a lot about Roman Polanski, actually, and some of the bizarre things with his relationship involving Sharon Tate. And I do have an episode about that called Several Crimes of Roman Polanski. And here in the Town and Country Mag episode, they have one looking back at the Preppy killer case more than 30 years later. The infamous Upper East Side murder has yet to fade from public memory. Jennifer Levin's death was at the hands of Robert Chambers, a case nicknamed the Preppy murder by the press. It first came to the attention 30 years ago. On August 26, 1986, Jennifer Levin was strangled in Central Park by Robert Chambers, and it really is quite shocking that this story generated so much news coverage. And True Crime Recaps described it as, the reason why is because Robert Chambers looked like the bully from a 1980s teen movie. He looked like someone who generated a strong media presence. Of course there's sensationalism, but I mean, there's so many similar crimes that are happening, like, what really is the twist of the story? And I was even thinking about that during the very first episode I ever saw about this case. Why are there so many news cameras around him? Why is the paparazzi following him? I mean, he's a murderer. I'm all about learning about the true crime world. However, I did not truly comprehend the media's fascination with this, to the point where they would put Robert Chambers on the cover of magazines, and they would try and promote him like he's some type of local celebrity. But he was a deviant, and some people believe that he was indeed a sociopath, in addition to being a convicted criminal. But he would serve 15 years in prison for the murder of Jennifer Levin. He got out of jail, then went back to jail for 100 days for driving with a suspended license, got out again, and then was sentenced to 19 years in prison for crimes that were drug-related. In True Crime Recaps, they said it was just dealing drugs out of his apartment, but Court TV presented it in a very different way, saying that he was actually running a very large drug operation, which I can only gather to be based on the connections that he had formed in prison. But I do want to point out something about the psychological elements of the media, because this is a psychological breakdown episode with serial killer cases. The reason why they are so fascinating to us is not because we're trying to glorify the murderer. It's not even because they like looking at the murderer. It's because they want to know how was this person able to operate in the shadows and to act as a serial killer without getting caught. Where did society go wrong? And what are the personality traits, psychological reasons, childhood and upbringing, as well as even sometimes neurological and scientific reasons for somebody to become a serial killer, to not only commit the crimes, but also to evade capture. With the Preppy murder, it is absolutely different. I mean, this guy did some very deviant things. He was a criminal, burglarizing, stealing, ripping people off, and definitely a host of other issues that would go on to drug-related crimes. And I should point out, though, that he was a drug addict in the 1980s as well. But he becomes famous because he was involved in the Preppy murder. So I think that there really is just a desire for image. He had an image that the media thought was very valuable, and they could put a spin on the story, and they tried to hype him up as being some type of very affluent individual, when in all reality he was not. But because this is a psychological breakdown and a comparing and contrasting, I would also like to begin the discussion on the Affluenza teen Ethan Couch. As I said, he was involved in a multi-car accident when he drove his Ford F-150 pickup truck through a residential neighborhood, driving about 70 miles an hour, and they said he didn't hit the brake once. He ended up killing 4 people. He was heavily intoxicated at the time, but he would go on to provide the defense of Affluenza, and it's not really him, of course. He has lawyers coming up with this stuff, but that's why he became known as the Affluenza teen. And Investopedia provides a definition for us here so we don't miss anything, and that is, what is affluenza? Affluenza is a social condition that arises from the desire to be more wealthy or successful. It can also be defined as the inability of an individual to understand the consequences of their actions because of their social status or economic privilege. Did you hear that? The defense for killing 4 people was really that he was a spoiled brat, or that the behaviors of his parents raising him in that spoiled way altered his thinking to the point where he was unaware of his actions and was unaware of his wrongdoing. And I was just watching the 2020 episode about the Affluenza teen Ethan Couch, and after this multi-car crash, look again, 4 people were killed in this. Then they say that he actually, of course, survived and not only was able to crawl out of the wreckage of the Ford F-150, but he was able to walk for a while, and then he passed out in a ditch, or he maybe even went down on his own accord, and someone came over and started talking to him, and he said, don't worry, I'll get you out of this, I'll get you out of this. Almost like he was talking to one of his friends, and he was perhaps very disoriented, but saying, I'll get you out of this, meaning that no one is going to get in trouble. And I first learned about the Affluenza team by watching the Reels channel, which, to their credit, they definitely provide dramatic recreations, and they zone in on very particular details that just pull you into these stories. And I've listened to a lot of the podcast episodes from Reels that have been uploaded onto Podcast One, but recently I started watching the Reels channel, and they just did a 2-hour segment on the Affluenza teen, and they also talked to lots of people who knew Ethan Couch. And if you were to Google him, in one source, it says that he killed 4 people in this accident, but also that 9 people were injured. I believe in other sources that states that 12 or 13 people were injured, but that might simply be the 9 plus 4, meaning that 13 people were affected by his multi-car crash. And it is just quite shocking if you look at some of the photos of the wreckage, because there are tables and chairs from a function that was going on nearby, which is why so many people were out on the roads. I mean, they had no idea that someone was going to drive 70 miles an hour being intoxicated, most likely 3 times the legal limit or 4 times the legal limit even. And he ended up killing multiple people, but the wreckage is just enormous. Some people say it looked like a plane crash because there are mangled pieces of metal, and not only that, but mailboxes, as I said, tables and chairs, all types of broken glass shards everywhere. And the defense was that he was so spoiled that he didn't know what he was doing. The long story short with the Affluenza teen is that he was given a second chance at life, pretty much the way that many rich kids are, and his father actually made his fortune in the sheet metal industry, but he would violate the terms of whatever type of probation it was, and he actually fled the country for a while, going into Mexico, but then he was sent back and did serve time in jail for this, but he never really gave up his partying ways. I find that a very big difference between these cases is there is some glorification in the media about Robert Chambers, the Preppy killer, and as I said, True Crime Recap simply just said it flat out. The media is all around this guy. They were all around this guy, rather, because they thought that he had an attractive physical appearance. Whereas with Ethan Couch, the Affluenza teen, I noticed that they're really trying to vilify him. They're trying to make him look like the scum of the earth, and he definitely was a very bad person. Now, here's something, though, that we can actually talk about, because this isn't a courtroom, there are no objections, and no, this Affluenza defense is nonsensical. Obviously, it's not true that he was so spoiled that his parents raised him in a way in which he didn't understand right and wrong. Absolutely not. Now, maybe he didn't truly comprehend the consequences of his actions, that he didn't think he would go to jail for something like this. Yeah, but he knew he wasn't supposed to get drunk and get behind the wheel of a car and to drive 70 miles an hour. I mean, it really is possible that he probably had a 0.3 blood alcohol level, but he knew he wasn't supposed to do anything associated with drunk driving or to even be in that position to begin with. It's a ridiculous defense, and obviously it's just something to come up with to try and confuse people. This is how lawyers play things out. If you cannot convince, you confuse. And you may have heard of the Twinkie defense in the past, about how the guy had all that junk food in his system, so it affected his thinking to the point where he lost awareness of his mental faculties, and maybe it worked one time. Well, this is just another Twinkie defense. It's the Affluenza defense, and it's not a justification. And obviously this guy knew that he shouldn't have been doing things like drunk driving. He just thought that maybe he wouldn't be incarcerated for it. But I am reminded of some of the discussions that we've had in the past on this channel about two other criminals, and those are Ted Bundy and Jodi Arias. Because with both Ted Bundy and Jodi Arias, it's the same story as Robert Chambers. They're saying that these are very attractive people in the conventional sense, and an interesting tidbit about them is both of them might actually have symmetrical faces, and extremely symmetrical faces attract people. Michael Shermer talks all about this in The Science of Good and Evil, as well as some of his other writings, saying that human beings are attracted to clear skin and symmetrical faces because they are signs of strong genetic health. And I can only guess, but I think that this can also be something that leads to sociopathy, to the point where people are just always being around those who find them attractive, and they learn how to manipulate people because of that, and of course lack of bonding with their parents. But the manipulation aspect shouldn't be downplayed, because you can see how the media was just swarming around Robert Chambers, the Preppy killer, and I think that he probably developed a lot of that from a very early age, learning how to manipulate people, or people are just simply attracted to him and they want to be around him, and he's able to blend in with other preppy individuals from high society. Whereas with Ethan Couch, the Affluenza teen, as I said, he definitely seemed to have had access to resources and money, and it seems like he was indeed a rich kid rather than pretending to be a rich kid, but he still tried to put on the facade of being someone who was more important than he actually was, and that openly led to his downfall. And he did get sent back to prison. And actually, if you were even to Google the Affluenza teen Ethan Couch, you'll find a lot of things about his arrest records, but this one is from the Associated Press, January 2020. A Texas man who used affluenza as a defense at his trial for killing 4 people while drunk driving was arrested Thursday, as I said, back in 2020. Authorities say after he violated the terms of his probation, Ethan Couch, age 22, was booked into a jail in Fort Worth after he tested positive for THC, the psychoactive component in marijuana. I mean, this maybe marijuana isn't the most evil thing in the world, but if he violated the terms of his probation, he violated the terms of his probation. Couch's attorneys Scott Brown and Reagan Wynn said their client had been intensely monitored for alcohol and illegal substances for more than 20 months and has never been positive for any substance abuse before. We cannot make any further statement because we don't have the opportunity to conduct an investigation to determine if, in fact, Ethan ingested THC, and if so, was it voluntary or part of a different act? I mean, involuntary. I mean, did you eat something that contained it, or was it laced? This is the way lawyers spin things again. I mean, even though, as I said, marijuana isn't the most evil thing in the world, my gut instinct and my first impression tells me he probably knew he was doing something marijuana related. But again, lawyers can spin things. Jail records did not indicate whether his bond had been set on Thursday, again in 2020 or not. Ethan Couch became known as the Affluenza teen during his manslaughter trial for the 2013 crash, which saw the deaths of 4 people. Couch, aged 16 at the time, was found to have a blood alcohol 3 times the legal limit for adult drivers after the crash. And the point they wanted to bring up on 2020 was that it was 3 times the legal limit, but 3 hours had passed after the crash, and before they were actually able to check his blood alcohol level, his blood alcohol content. So that means he was most likely 4 times the legal limit. As I understand the way alcohol works is that, like, 1 drink of alcohol, whether it's 4 ounces of wine or 12 ounces of beer or 1.5 ounces of hard liquor, depending on which kind of liquor it is, it takes 1 hour for that to get out of your system. 1 hour for 1 drink of alcohol to get out of your system, like 60 minutes before your blood alcohol content will go down. Whether someone were to do 5 shots of vodka straight in a row, that means that they're going to have alcohol in their system for 5 hours. And I mean, it's not a perfect science, but that's more or less how it seems to function. And body weight and fat to muscle ratio, those also play into blood alcohol content. But I do want to point out that in addition to drinking beer on the night of the crash, it's also reported that Ethan and the people with him were drinking Everclear, which is a very high alcohol content beverage. So, back to the article here. A psychologist told a juvenile court that he was affected by affluenza or irresponsibility caused by family wealth. Ridiculous. 4 people died, and he really shouldn't have been given a second chance. I mean, even if that's like your only defense, then he should have been sent to jail anyway. So says me. Again, I'm not a lawyer. Obviously, you're trying to see. They're just trying to play to people's emotions, and the Preppy killer, Robert Chambers, is the same thing as well. Except they're trying to play to the people's emotions in terms of making him likable, as well as vilifying the other person. That is a big difference in these 2 trials, the Affluenza teen and the Preppy killer, because so much of the Preppy killer's defense was that the victim, Jennifer Levin, was out of control, that she's the aggressor, and they even brought up the point that she was wearing a mini skirt at the time that she was murdered, and like, oh, she's just a tramp, she's just a hoe, she's just a woman who didn't control her impulses. She was trying to get with a man whom she thought was very affluent and involved in this upper elite circle of New York, and she couldn't get him, so he pushed her too hard, or maybe he punched her in the throat to get her to stop, and that was that. I mean, that again is a bogus defense. And again, these are both 2 people who just think that they aren't gonna get in trouble for things. They think they're not gonna get jail time, and they both did end up going to jail, but they didn't expect it. I can only guess, but I think they both expected that they were just gonna walk away from this scot-free and they would never go to jail. So, the defense, though, is putting, with the Affluenza teen, is putting the blame on his parents, and they're trying to make it look like this kid was raised in a way that was ineffective and inappropriate, and he shouldn't be responsible for this. Whereas with the Preppy killer, they're trying to make you think that he was just some guy who was innocent, and that the woman who wanted to be with him was the bad person. Blaming the victim almost never works, but well, I mean, what do I know? Well, I do know, actually. I do know that blaming the victim almost never works, because Robert Chambers was convicted. When I said, what do I know, I was thinking, I mean, I'm not a lawyer. These guys should know the stuff better than I do, but he was indeed convicted. Now, about Ethan Couch, the Affluenza teen, a judge originally sentenced Couch to 10 years of probation, but he later was jailed after attending a party where alcohol was served and then fleeing to Mexico with his mother to avoid punishment. And I believe they actually went to the city of Puerto Vallarta. And there's a very famous video of Ethan at a party where somebody else, not Ethan, but a different male, is playing the game of beer pong, and he jumps on the table and the table crashes and breaks, and then you can see Ethan is at the party. But that was a term that he was not supposed to be involved with any type of drinking. And Ethan Couch was released in 2018 after serving nearly 2 years in prison. In 2013, Couch lost control of his family's pickup truck after he and his friends had been playing beer pong and drank beer, which was stolen from Walmart. And as I said, it's most likely they also drank Everclear. He veered into a crowd of people, helping the driver of a disabled vehicle on the side of the road. Authorities later estimated that he was going 70 miles per hour in a 40-mile zone. That's a difference. Where I encountered one source that at least said that he was driving 70 miles an hour in a 25-mile-an-hour zone, but no matter what it is, he's definitely speeding, and he was most likely had a blood alcohol content that was around 0.32. The crash fatally injured the stranded motorist, a youth minister who stopped to help her, and a daughter and a mother who came out of a nearby home. Tanya Couch, Ethan's mother, is awaiting trial on charges of hindering apprehension of a felon and money laundering arising from when they fled to Mexico in 2015. I mean, that's just a case of the apple doesn't fall far from the tree, and yes, the parents want to keep their kid out of jail, but I mean, this was such a big story at the time, and let alone the fact that he actually did it. He was very guilty, and he killed 4 people, and the sentence, I mean, he should have served a time. Do the crime, do the time, and that's honestly the way that they should have gone about it. Running away to Mexico only made things worse, but again, what do I know? I mean, these people, again, just now they've created a whole new set of legal troubles for themselves, and Ethan's mother has been in and out of jail since then. But that's just what I'm noticing here with both the Preppy killer and the Affluenza teen. Lack of accountability. You have 2 people who think that they are above the law, that they aren't going to get in trouble for anything, that they are simply going to be in this untouchable place. But that doesn't mean that they didn't know right from wrong, especially with the Affluenza teen, because that was his whole defense, that his spoiled lifestyle led him to a point where he didn't know what he was doing, that he wasn't aware of his mental faculties. And as far as killing the 4 people, I believe that the 4 people were actually standing outside of the vehicles, and he crashed into at least 2 other cars, and the people inside those vehicles were survivors, but because the other 4 people were just standing outside, and as they heard they were helping somebody, and there was a function that was going on nearby, that they passed away, and they were killed almost instantly. One man lost both his wife and his daughter in that crash, and it's absolutely saddening, and it was just something that shouldn't have happened. And as I understand it, according to the 2020 news piece that was done on Ethan Couch, that his parents were in a different home at the time. They were in a larger ranch estate, and Ethan was in a house by himself. And as you heard in that article, they had stolen beer from Walmart. I believe there's even security footage of them just kind of walking around. And I was like, how are these teens getting the beer? Well, they just kind of snuck out with it, and they also had access to Everclear, and they went out of control, and particularly Ethan, who was the driver of the truck, and numerous other people could have been killed because of his actions. And I cannot believe that somebody was 16 years old and didn't understand the concept of drunk driving or getting behind the wheel. And I mean, he shouldn't even have been purchasing or stealing alcohol at all. That's another point. Stealing, yes, he may not have cared if he got caught or not, or thought that his parents would handle the situation, but he should have known that he isn't supposed to steal beer from a Walmart. And a big point with this is I think with the Preppy killer, they weren't trying to say that he wasn't aware of his mental faculties. Instead, they were saying that somebody else was not aware of their mental faculties, that someone just couldn't overcome the urges and the temptations. But both of these defenses were ridiculous. These people are total frauds. They're just making up silly stories to try and get their clients out of jail and off the hook, and lawyers are going to do what they have to do. They have to try to win. The objective of the lawyer and the attorney is to win the case. It's not to evaluate anyone's moral or ethical compass. But one point from True Crime Recaps that I had never heard before was that the Preppy killer, Robert Chambers, was actually the inspiration for Law and Order SVU. Because of the news coverage that was surrounding his case, Dick Wolf, who created Law and Order, wanted to go deeper into the psychology of the sex offender and to learn more about that and to put it out on television, and that led to perhaps the most successful Law and Order episode, even more successful than the original. And I haven't watched Law and Order SVU in several years, but I was definitely a big fan in the past, and I really thought that there was just somewhat of a more compelling element to SVU, and I think a lot of it is because of Benson and Stabler, Mariska Hargitay, and Christopher Maloney, the two lead actors that were on from the beginning, and of course the cast and lineup has had some different changes, but I do think that the media played a very big role in both of these cases, and in one story, they're trying to turn the person into the villain, the Affluenza teen. They don't want you to like him. They want you to dislike him. Whereas with Robert Chambers, the Preppy killer, they almost make him into a man of mystery. They want to be like, okay, he most likely did it, but what if he didn't? And what was he really doing? What was his life really like? As I said, they turn him into somewhat of a question mark. Whereas with the Affluenza teen, they're just saying, oh yeah, he's a spoiled brat. He's a terrible person. You're not supposed to like him. It's good that he went back to jail. And I think that that's just media perception. It's trying to it gets us talking about it. I'm talking about them now, and I've been for this entire episode. But what would you say about both of these cases, the Preppy killer and the Affluenza teen? I would love to read your comments in the section down below. Anybody can write the show at BlackBoxOnlineRadio@AOL.com. You can also get me on Facebook at BlackBoxOnlineRadio, as well as my own personal Facebook, which is in the description box. And of course, there is always BlackBoxNid88 on Instagram. And I would love to just hear your responses to these stories, and what do you think is going on? Is there any type of psychological element that you felt was not discussed, or if you want to talk about Law and Order SVU or any of the Law and Order spin-offs, that is definitely welcome. Respond in any way you like, and I will see you over on Instagram for the bonus podcast. Until next time.